It's that time again. Time for another episode of Shelve It or Shove It, the completely superficial way to pick your TBR based solely on their covers. I am your host, Daisy X Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I'm looking at Goodreads new releases for November to pick one book for my TBR for December, and I'll be looking at young adult, science fiction, and fantasy. So let's get right to it, starting with young adult. First up is Check and Mate by Allie Hazelwood, and it looks like a young adult romance. You know, if you've been watching me at all, that I'm not really a big fan of YA romance or romance in general as a genre. I do like the chess pieces and the illustration, but of course this is not for me, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Betting on You by Lynn Painter. And the same thing can be said for this one as the last one. Looks like a YA romance. I'm not interested in YA romance. And the illustration looks really cartoony. I don't like this illustration that much anyway. So I'm going to have to go ahead and shove it. And next up is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. I think there is a run on YA romance this month. The tagline is, "The path to true love never did run straight." So I guess this is, I'm going to say YA fantasy romance with the LGBTQ twist. So I kind of like that, but I'm not into romance. And honestly, the illustration looks a little weak. So I'm going to have to shove it. And next up is Defiant by Brandon Sanderson. We, of course, all know who Brandon Sanderson is. He's mostly known for epic fantasy in adult, but this is his young adult series. This is book 4 of Skyward. I actually really do like this illustration. This is my favorite cover so far in YA, but I'm not going to start a series on book 4, so of course I'm going to have to shove it. And finally, in young adult, Godly Heathens by H.E. Edgman, yeah. And the tagline is Infatuation, Reincarnation, Damnation. So I like this illustration, but it's not giving me anything special. I'm not quite sure what this is other than, it seems to me, generic fantasy, although I like the reincarnation aspect in fantasy. So that's intriguing, but just by this cover, I'm going to have to shove it. Now we move on to science fiction. And first up is The Future by Naomi Alderman. It's very simple. Looks like this fox. I have no idea what this could be about. I'm going to think of some virtual reality thing because the fox-like figure looks a little like maybe a gaming icon, but that is a huge guess. Not getting enough from the cover to make me want to pick it up, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is System Collapse by Martha Wells. This is a Murderbot book, and I have read I think I read the first Murderbot novel, and I've been wanting to read more, but I think this is like deep into the series. So I have to say I love this cover. Absolutely gorgeous cover. All the Murderbot covers are pretty good in my opinion. This one has Murderbot. He's an android. Maybe it's a cyborg. And he's like crouched down in an action figure, and there's this sort of spidery robot, gargantuan, coming at him. So I like the cover, but I'm not going to pick up Murderbot book deep in the series. But I highly recommend you check out Murderbot, especially if you like short, I believe these are novellas. If you like short science fiction stories, check it out. But for Shelve It or Shove It, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is a Cory Doctorow novel, The Lost Cause. And the tagline is a novel of truth and reconciliation in our polarized future. So, sounds very political. I do have to say, I don't usually like Cory Doctorow covers. Nothing about his writing. That says nothing about his writing, but just the covers themselves don't usually do it for me. But of the covers I've seen for Doctorow, I like this one more because the golden snake is very vibrant, and I like this blue, almost a cobalt blue, and there's like a tear dripping from its eye. I'm not so sure about a science fiction political thriller. I'm not sure what this could be about. The politics is making me pause, but I think the cover is striking. So you know what? I'm just going to go ahead, because I haven't shelved anything yet. I'm just going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is Chaos Terminal by Muir Lafferty. Now, I did read and pick from Shelve It or Shove It her first book in this series called Station Eternity. It says a Mid-Solar Murders book. And I liked the style of cover back then, and I like it now. I sort of like this retro look of this woman floating through, I guess, a space station. I love this cutout look to it. I like sort of this color blocking. We see a wasp, which is one of the aliens in at least the first novel. And even though I don't usually pick sequels or books later in the series, I'm going to make an exception here because I picked the first book for Shelve It or Shove It, and I like this cover as well. So that means I'm going to shelve it. And finally, in science fiction, The Eye of Darkness by George Mann. It's a Star Wars: The High Republic novel, and I think this is a gorgeous cover. I always like the artwork that Star Wars manages to invest in, and this is no exception. I guess it's a Jedi or someone with a lightsaber who looks very intense. Could be a Dark Lord, I don't know. But I'm not really big on Star Wars novels. I mean, the only one I liked was the Splinter in the Mind's Eye by Ellen Dean Foster, which was written 30 years ago. So I'm just not into Star Wars novels. So I'm going to have to shove it. And now we move on to fantasy. And first up is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. And it's reminding me of The Fourth Wing. I think since The Fourth Wing was such a huge hit, that they're duplicating that type of cover design. And it's not my favorite cover design. It's mostly the name or the title of the book that's the feature, but there's sort of this sketch around it. In this case, there's like dragons, and I don't know. This just isn't my favorite type of cover. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. And this, of course, must be the sequel to Legends and Latte, which I see Kingfisher has a little recommendation, but Baldree just won the Hugo for Best New Author, and I did read Legends and Lattes, loved it. It's a humorous light. I think they're calling it a cozy fantasy, and this cover is just adorable. Again, I don't usually pick sequels, but since I've read the first one, and I believe, did I pick it for Shelved or Shove It? I'm not sure. But I know I've talked about it before, so I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is Power Unbound by Freya Marski. I'm not sure what's going on here. It's looking kind of Jane Austen-ish period piece or historical, and there's these two men in pink silhouettes, so maybe there's an LGBT aspect to this. Maybe you have to read a lot into this cover to try to get a sense of the story, and it's not really drawing me in. I like the pink standing out against the green, but yeah, I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Warrior of the Wind by Suyi Davies Akinboa. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. I like this type of cover. This is a type of cover that's for me. This gorgeous illustrated figure. In this case, it's a warrior woman, and I like sort of that silver arabesque thing around her. And yeah, this is my type of cover. So that means I'm going to have to shelve it. And finally, in fantasy, and our last book is The Olympian Affair by Jim Butcher. And it says this in your spire, so I assume this is a series. Jim Butcher is, of course, a great writer, Dresden Files. I'm not impressed by this cover, though. It looks like generic fantasy. There's these two crossed swords, a crown, and it's not really telling me a story. Are those butterflies or dragons behind the crown? I'm not sure. Love the author, do not love this cover. So I'm going to have to shove it. Okay, we did not shelve any young adult. We did shelve 2 science fiction into fantasy. The science fiction is The Lost Cause by Cory Doctorow and Chaos Terminal by Muir Lafferty. In fantasy, we shelved Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree and Warrior of the Wind by Suyi Davies Akinboa. And I apologize for mispronouncing that name. Okay, so interesting. I know 2 of these are sequels, Chaos Terminal and Bookshops and Bone Dust. I'm going to say no to the Cory Doctorow because even though I think that's one of the better covers from this author, I'm still not a big fan of that cover design. And so that leaves Chaos Terminal, Bookshops and Bone Dust, and Warrior in the Wind. Okay, I'm going to go with Chaos Terminal. Chaos Terminal by Muir Lafferty. I really enjoyed the first book. I'm really curious about this second book, and it has that same sort of retro, unique style that I adored on the first novel, and it's here again on Chaos Terminal. Okay, so I want to read the blurb, but this is a sequel, and if there are spoilers to the first book, go ahead and skip this section. In fact, I'll link up here. Go and listen to the blurb I did for the first book, Station Eternity. And if you've already read Station Eternity, go ahead and listen in for the blurb for Chaos Terminal. Mallory Viridian would rather not be an amateur detective and fled to outer space to avoid it, but when one of the new human arrivals on a space station is murdered, she's back in the game. Mallory Viridian would rather not be an amateur detective, thank you very much. But no matter what she does, people persist in dying around her, and only she seems to be able to solve the crime. After fleeing to an alien space station in hopes that the lack of humans would stop the murders, a serial killer had the nerve to follow her to Station Eternity. Mallory deduced who the true culprit was that time too. Now, the law enforcement agent who hounded Mallory on Earth has come to Station Eternity, along with her teenage crush and his sister, Mallory's best friend from high school. Mallory doesn't believe in coincidences, and so she's not at all surprised when someone in the latest shuttle from Earth is murdered. It's the story of her life after all. Only this time she has more than a killer to deal with. Between her fugitive friends, a new threat arising from the sundry hive mind, and the alarmingly peculiar behavior of the sentient space station they call home, even Mallory's deductive abilities are strained. If she can't find out what's going on and fast, a disaster of intergalactic proportions may occur. Okay, the first half of that blurb is actually a blurb for Station Eternity, and I don't really think there are spoilers here if you want to go back and listen to it if you skipped it. But I'm kind of curious if this is, because it's called the Midsummer Murders series, I wonder if they're kind of standalone mysteries, because people or humans around our main character always dies, and then she has to figure out why they're dying for reasons. Go read Station Eternity. So one of the things I like about this writer is the humor, and it's not over the top, but John Scalzi type humor, but it's just sort of light humorous writing that I find very engaging. And I love the alien species, and I love the main character where people are always dying around her, so she has to be the detective. So I'm very excited to read Chaos Terminal. But I want to know about you. What books would you have picked based solely on the covers? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be